Hello everyone, welcome to the lecture on principles of animation. So today we will start talking about animation. We have been looking at modeling, various kinds of primitives and curves and surfaces. Then we have looked at rendering. We have looked at how illumination is modeled and shading is done. Then we have looked at texture mapping as another component of rendering and how do we use textures for various purposes to create effects like bump mapping and displacement mapping. And finally, as a conclusion to the computer graphics course, we are now at the topic of animation. Today we will talk about the principles of animation. These are more principles that govern the aesthetic look and the impact that the animation has on its audience. So let us start by a sort of a dry definition of the term animation. The term animation has roots in the Greek word animos as well as the Roman word anima, which both mean to bring to life. And here are two very fine examples of cinematic animation: Ratatouille, which is from Pixar, and Spirited Away, which is from Hayao Miyazaki's Studio Ghibli. So if you haven't seen either of these, I suggest very strongly that you go and have a look. But I doubt there will be any of you who has not seen any animation at all. So we all understand kind of intuitively what is animation all about. In more technical terms, animation is just a series of pictures that have been created using various methods of objects or characters in motion. These pictures or images are displayed at some rate, which is usually fixed, like 25 frames per second, 30 frames per second, and so on. And there are various ways using which you can generate these series of images. You can draw on sheets of paper, and you can flip those sheets of paper one after the other and record that. This is the flip book. You can create models out of clay and you can place them in certain positions and poses and take their pictures and then move them and repose them and take their pictures again, repeating this process many times. And then when you play back these sequence of pictures or images that you took, you get what is known as stop motion animation or claymation if your models were made of clay. Then you have traditional hand-drawn animation where you draw these various images or frames by hand and you draw all your objects and your characters by hand. This is extremely laborious and requires a lot of skill on the part of the animator. Then there is computer assisted keyframing where you create the keyframes which are certain important poses and certain important positions that the characters and your objects might have, and you model these inside the computer using a 3D content creation program like Maya or Blender or Houdini, and then you use the computer to interpolate between these keyframes that generates the animation. Then you have motion capture. Here you directly record a performer by placing sensors or markers on the body of the performer and recording the positions of those sensors or markers using various kinds of cameras. Then this recording, which is actually a capture of the movement of these markers in three-dimensional space, is applied to various characters to create animation. And the final method listed here is simulation, where you actually simulate physics based models of various phenomena like fire or fluid flow or even collision, for example, of rigid bodies. And you use that simulation to generate the images that finally result in your animation. So the principles that we will talk about today were developed for traditional hand-drawn animation, because artists had been drawing static drawings of characters, of figures, and then they realized that they could make one pose of the character after another and look at these over time once the motion picture was invented. So you can use these hand-drawn static poses as frames in a motion picture and you get animation. But when they started doing this, everything that they had learned for drawing static poses would still give very nice, beautiful static poses, but would not give fluid animation. So the very first few years, or the artists who worked in these very first few years, they had to rack their brains and come up with principles that would guide animators over decades to come and help them in creating animations that would just draw in their audiences and keep their eyes glued to the screen. So these are the principles that we are going to talk about, and very similar principles also apply to 3D animation. So even though they were discovered for 2D hand-drawn animation, the same principles apply for 3D animation as well. So what is cell animation or hand-drawn animation? In order to create such an animation, there is usually a team of animators, out of which there are a few lead animators. The job of the lead animator is to draw the key poses. The key poses are the important poses that define what kind of movement is happening. So here you can see that this person is going to turn his face. So these two images, you can think of them as the keyframes or the key poses. Then in addition to the lead animator, there are secondary animators who will go and draw the in-between frames, because you cannot just create an animation out of two frames. You need the intermediate motion of the head or the face as well. So there is going to be a team of secondary animators who are going to be drawing all the in-between frames. Okay, so these frames that you can see on these three images, which are being drawn in those particular frames, which is the dark colored sketches, those are the in-between frames, right? And depending upon how fluid you want your movement to be, how much time do you want to pass between the key poses, and what is the rate at which you are animating, you can be required to draw anything close to 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second and so on. So you can imagine that drawing all these in between frames is a lot of work. But once you have put in that work, you get an animation that looks like this. But I want you to think about this for 2 minutes. Just think that if you are keyframing at 24 frames per second or 34 frames per second, just how many drawings do you have to make for a full feature length animation film? That can be anywhere from 1 hour to 2 hours. So it is immensely laborious, and you need a lot of skill and patience to pull this off. So Disney animators are known all over the world because of the kind of animation they create. And Disney has this unique style of animation that is very particular to Disney animation, so we will not go there. But in the early years of Disney, there were these master animators who put in a lot of work to try and figure out these principles of animation. And two of them, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, they wrote this book called The Illusion of Life, where they wrote about all these principles. This book came out in 1981, but they had been working for a few decades by the time this book came out. So many of the examples that we will see today are taken directly from this book. Also in 1997, John Lasseter, who is one of the founders of Pixar, came out with this paper called The Principles of Traditional Animation Applied to 3D Computer Animation in SIGGRAPH, which is a premier computer graphics conference. And there he showed that the same principles that Frank and Ollie talked about in The Illusion of Life also applied to 3D computer animation. So let us dive in right into these principles. The first principle is the preservation of volume. And remember that these were artists who were drawing on paper, and they were trying to draw living, moving creatures or objects or characters. Now, living beings are composed of flesh and muscle and skin and so on. And therefore, their bodies have volumes. This volume has to be preserved if your movement has to look physically plausible. Right? It may be exaggerated, but it still has to look physically plausible. So here you can see an example of a bag of flour that is the character that the Disney animators are animating. And they are showing this bag of flour such that, it is dejected, or it is happy, or it is doubling up in laughter, or it is crying. Right? So you can just imagine this bag of flour acting out all these emotions. But while doing all this, they are keeping in mind that this bag of flour has weight and it has volume, and at no point should it appear flat, because if it appears flat, then the viewer loses this illusion that it is a real character that the viewer should engage with. Of course, in modern 3D animation, your 3D animation engine takes care of the volume. You don't really have to bother about it so much. But when you were hand drawing, you had to take care of this manually. This is an important principle that artists have to learn when they begin animating. Then the next principle is squash and stretch. So if you have a bouncing ball, then this bouncing ball, as it drops down from a height, it gains speed, right? So if you even look at a video of a bouncing ball that is dropping down from a height, as it is about to strike the ground, if you pause your video, you will see that the bouncing ball appears slightly elongated. This may be because that the ball is very elastic, or it may also be because of the fact that there is motion blur and it has indeed blurred out the actual shape of the ball, and it is looking a bit elliptical, stretched in the direction of motion. When the ball is going to hit the ground, it is definitely going to squash if it is a elastic object. This gives you a feeling of impact and an idea of how strong the collision was. Then the process happens in reverse as this ball takes off again and rises to some height, and the bouncing motion can continue. So squash and stretch both are necessary for giving an idea of weight and for giving an idea about the motion the speed of the ball along with the timing. So here, this was a simple example of squash and stretch. Here is a more complex example of squash and stretch. So you can see here that this is a sketch of the dog Pluto, who is surprised at something, and then he has actually closed his eyes shut because he does not want to look at whatever it is that surprised him. So you can see the squash and the stretch. So first his face is stretching in surprise, and then he is squashing it to sort of close his eyes shut. So you can see that the drastic change in physical characteristics accentuate what Pluto is feeling, and the sketches communicate that feeling perfectly to the viewer. And the next principle is anticipation. Anticipation is telling the audience something is going to happen before it actually happens. And the way this is conveyed is using various cues in the drawing. For example, look at Donald here. Everybody can look at Donald in the sketch and say what he is going to do. He is going to break into a run, right? He is angry with someone, possibly the chipmunks who have again stolen something that belongs to him, and he is just going to make a dash for it. So your drawing has to be expressive enough, your pose has to be expressive enough so that it builds anticipation in your audience. Then there is a principle called staging that animation borrows from theater. Suppose you are watching a play and the actors are facing away from you and moving their hands. Then whatever it is that they are doing with their hands is not even going to be visible to you. They have to face you and do something for the movement to be visible. The animation has a similar principle that says that the position and the orientation of your characters with respect to your camera has to be such that the movement is clear in silhouette. So the silhouette, so you see the duck taking the rabbit out of the hat. You see the first image. The dark shaded image is the silhouette of the colored image, right? So you only see the outline. If you can make out what the movement is by just looking at this solid shaded outline, then the action is clear in silhouette. In the second case, you cannot even see the rabbit, so you cannot make out what the duck is doing. It is the same action, right? But it is poorly staged. So character posing and the placement of the camera is key in correctly staging your action. And this makes a lot of difference. So when you are animating in 3D and you have control of the character and you have control of the camera, which you do have in the animation that you are going to make, then place the camera in such a position and orientation with respect to your character such that the movement that you want to show is clearly visible. Otherwise, it is poorly staged and the impact of the animation is completely lost. Then there are these two contrasting methods of animating which are called straight ahead and pose to pose. So if you start with an idea in mind and draw all frames until you are done, that is called straight ahead animation. This is good for animating frantic motion, such as when there is some, unplanned or chaotic or unorganized movement that is happening. So you can see the bear Baloo here, and he's sort of scratching himself, and he's also talking at the same time. But the scratching action is something that is unplanned. So the animator has just drawn this sequence of poses one after the other. This is a fine example of straight ahead animation. However, for other kinds of animation, you first draw the key poses and then you fill in the in-betweens. That is known as pose-to-pose animation, and we have already seen examples of that. The next principle is called follow-through and overlapping action. So what does this mean? It means that objects in motion have inertia. So they will never stop suddenly unless they are hit by something, right? Or some great force is applied to stop that movement. Usually for every movement there is a follow through. So if there is a cricketer who is batting and he hits a six, then even after the bat has hit the ball, there is a follow through of the bat. So if you suddenly stop the bat as soon as the cricketer has hit the ball, batsman has hit the ball, then that's going to just look weird. And similarly, overlapping action. So we do various actions such that one action flows into another action while we are doing those movements. So you can see here that there is an example. So as she sneezes, you can see that there is, first she's rubbing her nose, then the handkerchief is out, then the sneezes happened and the handkerchief has been blown forward. So there are a number of movements happening here of her hands, her snout and the handkerchief, and they're all sort of overlapping each other. It is very difficult to say when did the movement of one start and the movement of the other part begin. This is to give a feel that the actions are happening naturally and that they follow each other naturally. So here is another very good example of follow through and overlapping action. So just inspect these sketches of this baby elephant, and he is standing on a puddle of glue. When he realizes this, he's trying to pull his legs out. So he's pulled one leg out, and by the time he has pulled one leg out, his snout is stuck. Then he's trying to pull his snout out, and by the time he has pulled his snout out, he has slipped and he has fallen and he's looking sheepish by the end of it. So very nicely animated in this sequence of sketches. And you can see that there are a number of movements happening here of the limbs of this elephant, of his ears, of his snout, and they all sort of gel together and follow one after the another to make this sequence look very natural.